it came to me that it was time to revisit it because it's the best short story I know about brokenness and using what is broken for another purpose. This comes from Robert Fulgum. Do you remember maybe 20 years ago, everyone was reading Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten? Do you recognize that title? This is a story from there. And I realized as I was reading it this morning again, it's a wonderful Pauline reference to where we get authority from and what we do with it, even though we're broken. This is called, Are There Any Questions? Are there any questions? An offer that comes at the end of college lectures and long meetings, said when an audience is not only overdosed with information, but when there is no time left anyhow. At times like that, you sure do have questions like, can we leave now? And what the heck was this meeting for? And yeah, where can I get a drink? The gesture is supposed to indicate openness on the part of the speaker, I suppose. But if in fact you do ask a question, both the speaker and the audience will give you drop-dead looks. And some fool, some earnest idiot always asks. And the speaker always answers by repeating most of what's been already said. But if there's a little time left, and there's a little silence in response to the invitation, I usually ask the most important question of all. What is the meaning of life? You never know, somebody may have an answer, and I'd really hate to miss it because I was too socially inhibited to ask. But when I ask, it's usually taken up as a kind of absurdist move. People laugh and nod and gather up their stuff, and the meeting and gathering is dismissed on that ridiculous note. Once, and only once, I asked that question and got a serious answer, one that is with me still. First, I must tell you where this happened, because the place has a power of its own. In Greece. Near the village of Gonia, on a rocky bay on the island of Crete, sits a Greek Orthodox monastery. Alongside it, on land donated by the monastery, is an institute dedicated to human understanding and peace, and especially between rapprochement between Germans and Cretans, an improbable task given the bitter residue of wartime. The site's important because it overlooks the small airstrip at Malim, where Nazi paratroopers invaded Crete and were attacked by peasants wielding kitchen knives and hay scythes. The retribution was terrible. The populations of whole villages were lined up and shot for assaulting Hitler's finest troops. High above the institute is a cemetery with a single cross marking the mass grave of Cretan partisans, and across the bay, on yet another hill, is the regimented burial ground of the Nazi paratroopers. The memorials are so placed that all might see and never forget. Hate was the only weapon the Cretans had at the end. It was a weapon many vowed never to give up. Never, ever. Against this heavy curtain of history, in this place where the stone of hatred is hard and thick, the existence of an institute devoted to healing the wounds of war is a fragile paradox. How has it come to be there? The answer is a man, Alexander Papaderos, a doctor of philosophy, teacher, politician, resident of Athens, but a son of this soil. At war's end, he came to believe that the Germans and the Cretans had much to give one another, much to learn from one another, that they had an example to set. For if they could forgive each other and construct a creative relationship, then any people could. To make a lovely story short, Papaderos succeeded. The institute became a reality, a conference ground on the site of the horror. And it was in fact a source of productive interaction between the two countries. Books have been written on the dreams that were realized by what people gave to other people in this place. By the time I came to the Institute for a summer session, Alexander Papaderos had become a living legend. One look at him and you saw his strength and intensity, energy, physical power, courage, intelligence, compassion, vivacity radiated from his person. And to speak to him, to shake his hand, to be in a room with him when he spoke was to experience his extraordinary electric humanity. Few men live up to their reputations when you get close. Alexander Papaderos was an exception. At the last session, on the last morning of a 2-week seminar on Greek culture, led by intellectuals and experts in their fields who were recruited by Papaderos from across Greece, Papaderos rose from his chair at the back of the room and walked to the front where he stood in the bright Greek sunlight of an open window and looked out. We followed his gaze across the bay to the Iron Cross marking the German cemetery. He turned and made the ritual gesture. Are there any questions? Quiet quilted the room. These 2 weeks had generated enough questions for a lifetime, but for now there was only silence. No questions. Papaderos swept the room with his eyes. So I asked, Dr. Papaderos, what is the meaning of life? The usual laughter followed and people stirred to go. Papaderos held up his hand and stilled the room and looked at me for a long time, asking with his eyes if I was serious, and seeing from my eyes that I was. I will answer your question. Taking his wallet out of his hip pocket, he fished into a leather billfold and brought out a very small round mirror, about the size of a quarter. And what he said went something like this. When I was a small child during the war, we were very poor and we lived in a remote village. One day on the road, I found a broken piece of a mirror. A German motorcycle had been wrecked in that place. I tried to find all the pieces and put them together, but it was not possible, so I kept only the largest piece, this one. And by scratching it on a stone, I made it round. I began to play with it as a toy and became fascinated by the fact that I could reflect light into dark places where the sun would never shine, in deep holes and in crevices and dark closets. It became a game for me to get light into the most inaccessible places I could find. I kept that little mirror, and as I went about my growing up, I would take it out in idle moments and continue the challenge of the game. As I became a man, I grew to understand that this was not just a child's game, but a metaphor for what I might do with my life. I came to understand that I am not the light or the source of light, but light, truth, understanding, knowledge is there, and it will only shine in many dark places if I will reflect it. I am a fragment of a mirror whose design and whole shape I do not know. Nevertheless, with what I have, I can reflect light into the dark places of the world, into the black places in the hearts of people, and change some things in some people. Perhaps others may see and do likewise. This is what I am about. This is the meaning of my life. And then he took his small mirror and, holding it carefully, caught the bright rays of daylight streaming through the window and reflected them onto my face and onto my hands folded on the desk in front of me. Much of what I experienced in the way of information about Greek culture and history that summer is gone from memory. But in the wallet of my mind, I carry a small, round mirror still. Are there any questions?